Welcome to How to Build More Accessible Sites with Wagtail. We're glad to see everybody here today. Hope you're having a very lovely PyCon so far. And I just realized I still have my mask on. And this is one of the few times I get to take it off, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. All right. Just to go over real quickly what we're going to be doing today, I'm going to do some talking at you first. It's not going to be a lot of talking, just a bit of introduction to the accessibility problems that we're dealing with. Then we're going to go through kind of how to set up Wagtail CMS and set up a basic blog with Wagtail. We're going to be using a template that's going to provide a lot of the setup code so that we can spend more of our time today focusing on the accessibility parts. So we want to walk you through how to use the accessibility checker that comes built into Wagtail. And also we're going to be walking through some different ways to reinforce accessibility practices using Wagtail. And also some best practices for images and alt text, help text, and then when we have time, if we have some time at the end, we'll go through how to continuously evaluate your website and make sure that you continue your accessibility practices. All right. So quick, who we are. I'm Meagen Voss. I am the Wagtail community manager. I work for an agency called Torchbox that's based in the United States. I'm one of two of their US-based employees, and I am also a member of the Wagtail core team.
And my name is Scott Cranfill. I'm a full-stack web developer at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, but also a member of the Wagtail core team with Meagen, and one of the co-founders of its accessibility subteam.
Awesome. Okay. All right, just to go over the prereqs real quick, hopefully you all got the email that we sent out last week, and this will not be an issue, and everybody will be prepared. So hopefully everybody has an IDE or a text editor or something that they enjoy putting code into, a web browser. Hopefully you all have Python installed on your computer already. If you're at this conference, I would be really surprised if you didn't. However, it has happened. So I always feel the need to say, please have Python installed. Also, if you're planning to use a service like Gitpod or something on the cloud, make sure that you have a GitHub account. So again, hopefully everybody has one. You have a question? That should hopefully take care of it. I haven't used PyCharm in a while, so I wish I could help you more specifically with that one. All right. All right, so here's the bit where I'm talking at you. Oh, and just for format's sake, like, if you do have trouble or need help with something as we're going along, when I'm up here speaking, Scott will be able to help you. So just, flag him down if you need help with anything as we're going through stuff. And when Scott is speaking, I will be helping out. All right, sound good? Everybody ready to roll? Okay. All right, so why web accessibility matters. This is one of the most troubling stats that I tend to put in any presentation. There's a big project, there's a Web AIM does this study every year looking at the top 1 million websites in the world, the most visited ones, and they get a pretty dismal number every year. And their testing found this year that the 95.9% of the top 1 million websites in the world have failures in WCAG2, which is the web accessibility standards. So imagine what it would be like if you had a failure rate for something like this in medicine or in, the astronauts that go up on rocket ships in Scott's line of work. Like, this is a failure rate that would be pretty much not acceptable in any other industry. Yet we continue to have this for accessibility. And this is an improvement. Last year's number was 96.3%. So, it's a very small moving number, but it's one that, is being addressed more forcefully because it is becoming the law to have an accessible website. Here in the United States, we have Section 508, which governs a lot of what our government agencies have to follow and standardize to. In the EU, they also have standards, and this map shows you pretty much every country that has passed legislation related to accessible websites. And you can see that a big chunk of that is in the EU, but there are areas all over the world that are starting to take this more seriously and starting to enforce it through the law. And if it's not just the law, it's also lawsuits. One of the examples that Scott likes to bring up all the time is Domino's got sued for their website accessibility, and they lost. So it's becoming a thing that companies and it's being enforced. And so we need to really start paying attention to it, not just out of a sake of moral imperative, but also our companies are going to be paying attention to their bottom line when it comes to this type of stuff too. It's kind of sad that that's what it takes. I think that the web should be imagine if you're a screen reader user, seeing that tiny fraction of beauty that the rest of us get to see, and the internet just makes me kind of sad, which is why I like talking about these types of things, because I think that everybody should get to experience the gorgeousness of cat memes. All right. So let's go over some common issues for users with accessibility needs, because there are definitely some trends that come up over and over again, and these are things that this report looks out for every year. One of the biggest offenders by far is low contrast. So usually that happens when you pick text colors that make it hard for people to read on them, or they're not compatible with high contrast themes, which are becoming more popular. There's also missing alt text, which is a huge one. We'll definitely be going over alt text today and ways to help make sure that that doesn't happen. There's missing form labels. If you've never gone through a form on a screen reader before, it can be a very painful experience. And forms are very important. They're not really optional anymore. There's not really many paper forms available. So it's very important to have that. Empty links, empty buttons, and missing document language. So some other things that tend to show up, screen reader users definitely have the bulk of the issues, but you also have to consider accessibility for folks who are hard of hearing. If your videos don't have captions or they're not burned in, then they won't have access that way. There's also people who need keyboard access as well, and if your website can't be navigated easily with a keyboard, then they're going to have trouble getting around to where they need to go. There's also consideration for folks who have neurodivergence in terms of they just can't handle certain patterns and how they're organized. Having something super flashy can be bad for folks who can get seizures from strobing effects and things like that. So there are a lot of different considerations for access. These are by far the biggest offenders, but it's definitely not the only thing that you have to consider. All right, so how do we know what to do then? Because, building a website can be it's such an open-ended thing. And, Wagtail itself is also so customizable. We get people coming to us all the time being well, what standards do we follow? Where do we start? When it comes to accessibility, the answer ultimately doesn't lie with us. It lies with the W3C, which is the Internet Standards Body. And they have something called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. These are not the only guidelines out there. There are others that exist, but this is definitely one of the main ones and one of the ones that you definitely want to shoot for. And especially in terms of the legislation that exists, a lot of that tends to be tied to the WCAG. So the latest version is WCAG 2.2. Many organizations are still working with a slightly older version, 2.1. Some are still on 2.0. It depends how quickly how good they are at keeping up with things. And right now, WCAG 3.0 is being drafted. Scott might have a different recommendation on this, but I'd say definitely if you're looking to implement something today, start with 2.2 and keep an eye on 3.0 because that is still being worked on. Although anything in software, if you want to be a beta tester, I'm sure some people will be really happy to have you. All right, who is responsible for accessibility? This is a trick question. Everyone on the team is responsible for accessibility. It doesn't just fall to the developer, it doesn't just fall to the content person, it doesn't just fall to the infrastructure person. Everybody on the team is responsible for this. And how many people in here work on a content team right now? Does anybody do a content management system? Well, we have totally new folks to this. This is great. Awesome. Typically with content management, you have folks who do the day-to-day editing, the drafting of the text that people read on the site, and then there's the developers behind the scene who help them make that happen. And so, think about a WordPress site when you have most of the folks who use the WordPress like it because it's super easy and that they can set it up real quickly without much code. Those are the types of folks who usually are creating the content, whereas developers are usually more behind the scenes and making sure that they can publish things and that the features they need are set up. And that's why, even though you have this kind of division of labor, everybody needs to work together to make accessibility great. But let's look at kind of what things break down. So most folks in here, would you say you're developers on the developer side of this divide, or would be more comfortable with the coding? Okay. So the things that kind of fall into your responsibility bucket then are the markup on the page. The way the HTML is structured is something that you have control over. This isn't something that, unless you have a super user who goes in and is it can be impossible to manage people who do all their own markups, so I don't usually recommend this, but some people do it this way. For the most part, the content creators are not going to touch the code. So anything that gets hard-coded, like semantic markup, the heading hierarchy, and the area labels, keyboard navigation, and things like that falls into your bucket of responsibility. Now, with content editors, their responsibility, depending on how much free rein you give them, is to make sure that they pick things like good contrast for colors, making sure the alt text is understandable and actually is something meaningful, that they're picking out good images. They're following the rules that you set, because some of them will try and break them. There are many times where they come in and they're like, but this is not the color that I want, or it's not the size that I want. Why do I have to use the H2 there? Can I use the H4? And it's because that's the color that I want. And it's no, you can't. You have to put them in order. So that's kind of their responsibility, is to follow the rules that you set up, so that nothing breaks. And ultimately picking good accessible colors and images, because they're going to be controlling a lot related to the images that are put into a content management system or a website. I don't know about you, but I don't like to hang on top of look over an editor's shoulder and be like, well, that image doesn't quite look good. They're going to do a lot of that work on their own, and you want them to, because otherwise it gets boring. All right, so what is Wagtail CMS? Any folks in here familiar with Django? Yes, okay, great. All right, so Pretty much, Wagtail is something that sits on top of Django, and Django sits on top of Python. So Django is a web framework used to build a lot of really big and powerful websites. And anybody who's familiar with Django knows that there is the Django admin section that's kind of like the back area for anybody who's not a coder to go in and add content and things like that. The thing about that section is that, you know, it's not exactly the most intuitive thing in the world, which is how Wagtail came to be. Wagtail is a dedicated content management system that's built on top of Django that makes it easier and more intuitive for people to, like, we give them a more of a content editing experience that lets them move around and mix and match, and it's much more intuitive than the typical Django admin backend. So that's pretty much what Wagtail is. It also saves you a lot of time having to manage things related to editor tools. Like, you know, we'll take care of a lot of the editing pieces. Like, you don't have to maintain a rich text editor or something like that. Like, a lot of that can get really annoying to maintain. Why do that when you can download our package instead? All right, I'm going to do the marketing stuff here first, just so that we can get it out of the way. I'm here under the auspices of my company, so this is my required bit. We have if you like Wagtail today, please sign up for our newsletter. We provide weekly-ish tips and also news on our events and things like that. We also have an event coming up in Philadelphia, so if you want to go 3 hours that way and join us for Wagtail Space in June, we would love to have you. All right. All right. If you do not have the workshop repository, I did send out an email about an hour ago, so that's in your inbox if you want the clicky bit. Otherwise, here's the URL. Everybody get into it. Anybody have any trouble? Uh-huh. Hmm. Yep. Okay. All right. Actually, this is where I X out of the slides and switch over. So pardon me while I get the microphone set up. Alrighty, folks. So we're going to start this out by setting up a virtual environment. Hopefully everybody here has done this at least once before. And again, Windows folks, you definitely want to make sure that you have the other commands available. So I'm going to go here. Does it need to be bigger? Okay, yeah. How does that look? Okay. Alrighty. And where was? Oh yes, that's right. I forgot to get. All right, that's my random programming folder. So we'll start doing things here. All right, first we're going to set up a virtual environment on Mac. We are going to use Venv, and I can spell today. And it's easier to name it EMV because that means that it won't show up in weird places on a GitHub repo if you want to put it in your git ignore file. All right, once we have that available, we're going to turn on our virtual environment by using source evbin activate. All right, and you should see the little parentheses, EMV, If you're on a Mac and using that terminal, it's probably going to be slightly different for Windows to make sure that that is activated. And it's so anybody not familiar with virtual environments? That's usually a good one to ask. Okay, shaky. All right, the reason why we do this is to make sure that we don't muck up everything else on our computer. Like if we were to globally install all this stuff, it would eventually conflict. So it's kind of like a little walled garden that we can install different dependencies on, and also different versions of Python if you want to. So that's why we're doing this. Okay, so now that we have our little walled garden, we're going to go ahead and install Python using PIP. Wagtail, yes. Hopefully you already have Python installed. All right. And it's going to be down at the bottom a little bit, but let's make sure that we have Wagtail installed by doing PIP show Wagtail. And this will double check the version as well, which the most current version should be 6.0.
1. 6.1.
6.1.
And I just wanted to reiterate that all of these steps that she's typing in are in the README on the step 1 branch. If you want to copy and paste them from there just to make sure you don't make any typos.
Yeah, whereas I'm going to sit up here and probably make more than a few typos, except I'm definitely copying the next one. So this step is slightly different from the typical setup instructions. To save some time, we're going to be using a template today that includes a lot of the code. Like we're like setting it up manually would have taken way too long. So we provided a bit of a starter for you. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that over. And start a project that way. And so at the end of the script, you should say, see success, my blog has been created. And folks, I know that you probably might be creative about creating different project names and things like that, but I suggest we stick with this and all the defaults today so that we don't have any issues with some of the scripts we choose to use. All right, once you have that template set up and we have a My Blog project started, we're going to cd into that directory. All right. Yeah. Yeah, he's got someone helping him. All right. So let's get into that directory here. And this is usually about the time, now that everything is created, that I like to open things up in my IDE versus just using the terminal for this demo. So let me go ahead and pull that open. Come on. So I usually like to drag just the whole My Blog folder into the IDE. Whatever you prefer to do, you're welcome to do. I'm going to go ahead and maximize this. I clicked the wrong button. Hopefully it'll open it back up. Yes, thank you. Thank you for good design, VS Code. All right, so zoom in a bit more. Okay. All right, that should do it. All right, good. And I'm gonna bring my terminal up. Toggle, come on. Resize it so it doesn't take up like 2/3 of the screen. All right, so we're going to, with Django, there is a development server, which is very handy because as you make changes, you can see them live. Before we do that, though, we're going to make some migrations so that we can get everything in the database that we need to get in there. So the command is Python manage.py migrate. Oh, fun. Oh, that's because I don't have my virtual environment up. This is why you need your virtual environment, folks. Okay. All right. CD. Okay. Now we can do CD my blog. All right. There we go. All right. Let's try that again. And one of the beautiful things about the migration tool, if anybody has ever messed around with databases before and SQL, it can be a bit thorny. One of the beautiful things about Django is it does a lot of that for you, which are where the migration files come from. They're mostly related to the database. All right, now that we've migrated everything that we need to migrate in the setup, we need to make sure that we can get into the back end of our website. So the command for that is python manage.py create super user. All right. And that way, when we create a super user, we have an admin. Like, I recommend using some like generic password today. This is not this is not a user that you would want to leave on a production instance, for example. But since we're just doing everything locally, I'm just going to use my name. And the email address is totally optional. Do you need some help? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, let's do. Does that help? Can everybody see? Okay. All right. So, email address is optional. I'm just going to leave that out and then put a generic password in, like Django1234, something like that, and it'll prompt you to do it again. All right. We have a super user successfully created. And this is where we're going to test our server and find out just how well things are running so far. So the command is python manage.py run server. All right, it looks so far like everything is behaving. And there is a link in the repo to get to the browser. But you can also use the shortcut localhost 8000. And this should be what you get. So, how many green eggs have we got? I see most hands up. Okay, anybody doesn't have the green egg yet? All right, you need some help? Okay. Scott, when you get a chance, our friend up front needs some help. All right. So this is pretty much a play on the standard Django rocket ship page. We choose to use an egg instead because we're Wagtail users and we like wagtails. All right. That should, for the most part, be step one. And I'll try my best not to leave you too far behind. So what we're going to do in the next step is we're going to start to organize how our data is going to be set up in the website. Who's familiar with the model view controller setup? Like, we got some hand things, like some hand waviness going on here. Yeah, he needs some help. So pretty much like in a website, in a Django website and a Wagtail website, the way things are structured is you have like a way to organize the data. Those are your models. And you have a way for how to view the data. Those are views. In Wagtail, a lot of those views are built in for you already. You do not need to customize them as much as you would for Django. That doesn't mean you won't ever do that. There are going to be times when you need them, but since in Wagtail you're mostly going to be using the models that are already included, you don't have to do a view all the time. It usually only comes up if there's something really specialized that you need to do. And controller is how things look on the website, what the person sees at the end. Those are handled through templates, which look kind of like fancy HTML templates, only there are some variables where your data is going to sit in the templates. All right. So what we're going to do before we we're going to go through extending kind of the home page part. And we'll probably not do as much of it for the blog part just so that we can save some time. All right, so let me bring this back. We are not going to need the terminal for a bit, so I'm going to come on. Give me my, nope, that's not what I want. I want to resize you, dang it. Oh, I see what happened. All right. Probably have to bring this down a smidge so that we can see everything up here. All right, so in our project structure here, you should see blog, custom media, home, my blog, and search. We're going to start out here in the home directory. When you open that up, you'll see pretty much a standard structure for a Wagtail or a Django project. There's almost always a migrations file that's related to how the database is set up, created to this app, static, and also templates. So I'm going to skip ahead to, I commented on structure probably a little later in the repo, but it's important, I think, for beginners to hear this one. There are kind of two ways to structure a Django or a Wagtail project. One is to create a separate app for every kind of chunk of the website. Like, you know, for the blog, we have our own app. For users, we would have our own app. For this custom media app is related to a custom image model. There are other approaches. Some people like to use what's called a core app, where they put pretty much all the core functions of their website in one super app, and they're both valid ways to do things. I just find the separate app structure to be more intuitive for new people. It also reduces decision fatigue because you don't have to think as much about where things go. So that's my comment on that and how things are structured there. But anyway, we're going to go back to home. And we're going to go to our models.py file. Like, each app is going to have a models file, and that's where the models related to that particular app will live. So everything related to the home page will be in home. Everything related to the blog page will be in the blog file. So right now, this is the default. It's very, very basic. It just says pass because we don't want to do anything too fancy with it. So we're going to start extending the homepage model. I'm going to go ahead and copy over kind of this whole section here. And let's go ahead and go through this a little bit. So are we all familiar with import statements? Anybody need to know what import statements are? And by the way, if you feel embarrassed about raising your hand in front of the group, you're more than welcome to ask me and Scott questions afterwards or during the break. Like, I don't think you should be embarrassed, but some people, it's a bit of a barrier. So we have some import statements related to Wagtail at the top. This is the page model. This is the key function of Wagtail. This is going to be a model that you use time and again in building a Wagtail website. We are also going to pull in some different fields related to how the data will be structured on the website, which is where rich text field comes from. And field panel is one of the tools that comes with Wagtail. We give you a lot of shortcuts for how you organize information on a page for your editors. When we bring up the back end of the website, I'll show you a bit more of that. But we're starting out with pretty much a basic homepage here. We're just going to add 2 fields to this homepage. We're going to give it a summary, kind of a little summary text so people know what the blog is about. And what the web page is about. And then every time you add a field to Wagtail, no matter what type of field it is, you have to tell Wagtail where you want it to appear in the page, which is where this content panels chunk of code comes into. So you have to tell Wagtail what the field is, what type of field it is, any settings you want to add to it. Like right now we have blank equals true, which is the setting. You can also set limits like character limits and things like that, which is super handy. And then you have to tell it how you want it displayed in the admin. Okay, so, right now what we have set up here, like just a bit of summary text on a homepage would be pretty boring for, a homepage. So we're gonna go ahead and add a image model as well. So I'm going to go ahead and copy over that chunk of code and put it in the right place. Like typically you want to keep all your fields together at the top when you're organizing things, and then mine likes to add in weird indents sometimes. We're going to put this over here so that this keeps, all right. And the thing here, though, is right now it's telling me that, we're missing images. It is not defined. So I have to add one more import statement up at the top here. And then we also, this is an exercise in showing you when you add a new field, you also have to add it to the content panel. So that's true whenever you update any of your pages, and also remove random tabs that like to insert themselves. All right. So, and the images have some different settings on them that are pretty important to add as well. So make sure you definitely copy everything over. All right. So right now we should have 2 fields in there, summary and main image. And so after you make changes to your models, this is true whether you do a straight Django project or whether you do a Wagtail project. Every time you make a change to a model, you have to update your migrations. And that, because the migrations are what are telling the database, we need this data to be in the database. All right. Make sure everybody can see this. All right, so right now I have my server running, and when you have your server running, you can't do migrations. So I'm gonna go ahead and do Control-C to make that stop. If anybody has trouble stopping their server, raise your hand. We're more than happy to help you figure that out. Because you don't want to make changes to the database you can have 2 terminals open too if you want to. I don't like juggling that many, so because you can run them both at the same time. All right, Python manage.py. So this command is slightly different. Instead of going straight to migrate, which you can do if you're feeling like, James Bond and dangerous, but I highly recommend you do something like this, make migrations, because this command gives you a chance to see what's changed. And if something goes wrong, it'll flag the error without making any changes to your database, which is, if it groks on an error when you're trying to actually migrate things, it looks like you need some help. Yeah. Okay. It looks like then you'll run into more issues than you would if you did make migrations first. All right. So once you have make migrations, and also like you'll notice over here, if you go in the migrations folder, you'll see that there will be a new migrations file here. It generates the file. It gives you a chance to look at it first before you move on and make changes. So, interesting. Why is it making that change? Okay. All right, so I'm going to go to Python manage.py, migrate. And now we have applied all our brand new migrations to the database. You're going to need some help again too? Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right, once we have those migrations in place, this is where we get our first look of kind of Wagtail from the back end. We're going to bring that development server back. So Python manage.py, which I always manage to misspell as mange at least once during these tutorials. I'm not trying to give you mange, I swear. Python manage.py, run server. All right. With that server, we can now go back to our web browser. You should still have the nice green egg there, but go ahead and append to your URL /admin, and this will give us the back end of the website. And this is where that super user you created earlier with a generic password comes in handy, because if you didn't create it, you have no way to get into the back end. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. And log in with that super user. My LastPass always likes to try and remember random passwords, so I'm going to tell it to go away. And this is Wagtail on the back end of the website. So this is your very first look at the Wagtail dashboard. It's a pretty standard content management system. Most folks who use WordPress are honestly pretty comfortable with Wagtail as well, but it's also very, very customizable, and you don't have to muck around with SQL as much to get it to do what you want it to do. So the standard implementation of Wagtail has a pages section. This is where all your pages and content in Wagtail will live. Wagtail uses a tree structure, so everything nests kind of like Russian nesting dolls. You have the home page, and then you have your blog and other pages live under the home page, and then the child pages for a blog live under the blog as well. And then there's also sections by default for images, documents. Wagtail also comes with a few reports out of the box, including things like detecting aging content, which is great. Sometimes you want to see if how old your content is, what needs refreshing, what can we get rid of. That's what reports are for. And there's also a settings section and a little help section that provides some links to our documentation and things like that right out of the box. And you can customize pretty much all of this and organize it in any way that you want, depending on your user's needs and things like that. All right, so that's the Wagtail admin backend. And so we're going to create a home page really quickly, just so that we have one to play around with. So go to Pages and to Home here. And right now there's nothing here because we have no pages sitting under Home yet. So most of the actions are up here. You could add a child page, but we're not going to do that right now because we want to create the home page itself. So find the little 3-dot menu here, and we're going to go down and edit our home page right here. And why is my summary not there? I did run the migration. but it for some reason did the custom. You know what I forgot to do? I forgot to put it in settings. So does anybody, like, I knew I forgot something. All right. This is a lesson in things that you do in Django all the time and muck up. Because whenever you add a new app to Django, you also have to put it down in settings. So that was the part of the lesson that I forgot to tell you guys. It's working for you? Well, let's double check that it's working for me. Yeah, because see, like it made a change to custom media, but it didn't make a change to home. That's why.
You didn't save your models.py.
I didn't save my models.py. There was the issue. Okay. Thank you, Scott. Lessons in saving, folks. Yeah. Yeah. I am not the best when it comes to auto saving. So, okay. I'm going to run those migrations again real quick.
Still haven't saved it.
It's still not saved. Shortcuts. Okay, we're doing this. Nuclear option. All right. I'm going to do this because I'm living dangerously. Okay. Okay. I'll do that. All right. And now we'll bring back our server. And hopefully I should just refresh it. And there we go, magic. Woohoo! Okay. So when you're making your page, you can, I like to use badgers in my, like the badger video stuck with me. So badgers are the best mammals on earth is probably what I'm gonna put here. Put whatever text you like in there. And then we'll go ahead and add an image of our choosing. So we're going to upload an image. And here's my badger. I just picked a badger image. Now you'll see here like that we already have a default alt text in here. That was something that we added in some of the shortcut code. We will go over that for you so that you understand that. Right now, like, you know, the title should be something that is easy to search. And then there's also tags. We're not going to use any of the tags in our demo today, but it's always a good idea to include them in case you need something later on. So I might give this tag mammal or something like that since it's a badger to be able to find that later. And so the image, which you probably only saw briefly, is this nice little badger in a field. So I'm just going to give it the default alt text, a black, oh look at this, a majestic black and white badger standing on a field of emerald green grass because I'm feeling poetic. And because the automatic fill also remembered my last bit of text. All right, I'm going to upload that. And so now we have some data in the back end. However, you'll notice if we click live up in the corner here, which whenever you want to see a page in Wagtail, if you click this little live button all the way up here in the corner, that'll take you straight to the page. I'll also go ahead and show you a few other things while we're here. The status menu here, this is where the settings are for knowing whether the page is live, whether it's been published or not. You can also do different settings related to privacy and passwords and how things are organized that way. We also have a nice preview panel, which right now is going to show us the egg because we haven't set up our home page templates yet. And it does different sizes as well. You can do like the full desktop, the tablet, and the mobile view. And you can also open it up into a full page view. And this is our, the accessibility checker we'll get to in a bit. That's where this lives, and it also lives on the page as well. And we also have a built-in commenting system, which editors love because they can just make comments direct in Wagtail and organize things that way. And also there's a great history tracker as well, which is great for organizations that really need to audit things and keep track of, like, you know, who published what or who made what change. Like, we have the auditing history built right in, which is super handy. Like I was saying, though, when you go to the live page, we still have this because, you know, we have some data in the page, but we didn't yet tell Wagtail how we wanted it displayed. I also should not just save it, but also publish it fully, which is this green button down here. You'll see, like, there's an option for moderation. We have workflows that can be built into Wagtail as well, but we're not going to touch those today. We're just going to stick with the basic publish and things like that. All right, so we're going to go back into our code because right now we have the default homepage hanging out with a green egg. We need to get rid of that, and we need to add a template for our page. So, my menu escaped and switched to the other screen. All right, we're going to go back to our code. And we're going to go back up here to our home application. And pretty much, like, actually, I think I taught this. Yeah, I taught it. I didn't fix that. We'll do that later. So normally your front-end people would really love you to keep all your templates in a single file somewhere because it makes it easier for them to find. Again, this is like the whole separate app structure thing. You can keep all your templates related to the home app here, or the blog app there, but that makes your front end folks go hunt around for it. The great thing about Django and Wagtail is that as long as you stick to the naming conventions, they can pretty much be wherever you want in the project structure, which is why the front end folks are usually like, put them all in one folder so that we don't have to go through all your Python BS. And that's pretty much what I usually recommend. But since I wrote in the repo that it should go in home, we will do that. So right now there's already a templates folder here, and there's already a homepage section here. We're going to create, actually we already have the file created. We don't have to create a new one. This homepage HTML file, it comes out of Wagtail standard. And right now what it has in it is basically some template code. So who is this, anybody's first time seeing template code in Django and things like that? Most people are familiar with it. Okay, great.
Django's or Django?
Django.
Wagtail, what?
Wagtail by default just uses Django's standard templating language, but it does have full support for Jinja 2 if you want to switch to that.
Yep. Okay. Good to know. All right, so we got our template here in the repo. We're going to copy over and pretty much like update this entire file here. So the way templates work in Django, it sounds like most people are familiar with it, but just really quickly, like, you know, we have a base HTML template which has all of the kind of like HTML aspects to it, and then we segment everything else out. And so right now you can see that we have some basic styling here for our homepage. We also included some basic CSS so that it wouldn't look like ridiculously terrible when you open it, aside from like one little spacing thing that got thrown in at last minute. So pretty much whenever you take the data in the models and put them into template, the variable that you add is the model name dot whatever you named your field. So there are some default fields in Wagtail. One of them is title. Every page that you create in Wagtail is going to have a title. So you definitely have to tell Wagtail in the template what you want to do with that. And then we added the summary here. And then right here is where the image template lives. So once we have this in place, Wagtail knows how all that data we added is going to be structured. All right, so let's save that all. And let's go back to our browser. So once you save that file and go back to the live view of the homepage, you should see, with its somewhat annoying spacing, our homepage with some basic styling to it. Now, one thing you'll notice is that right now there's some weirdness happening around the content. This is because we need to tell it to filter out the tags related to HTML. So we're going to go ahead and update our template a little bit to use one of those filters. Filters are super handy for things like data and stuff like that. Most folks in Wagtail wind up using the rich text filter, but there are other filters that you can use as well. It's pretty much, we're going to update this line here, line 10, so that it has this bar and then rich text. And once you add that filter and you save the file, this is just an example of how you can filter the input so that it presents better on a template. You can also use filters to manipulate data. You can use filters to organize things differently. So those are super handy features, like for Django and for Wagtail. And we do have some that are specific to Wagtail that are super useful. All right, so everybody got a homepage set up. Everybody got a picture. If it's not a badger, it's hopefully something equally as cute or nice. And ferrets, we got ferrets. Awesome. Great. I love it. We're going to go ahead and move into step 3. Now, we're not going to do a lot of hand coding in this one. So mostly because, let me get back to the presentation. I want to spend some time talking about something that tripped me up as a beginner, and that's custom models. They are a trap. You want to make sure when you're custom models are things that come with by default with Django or Wagtail, but usually need to be modified for some reason. A very common one in Django is the user model, because people usually need to collect additional data on their users when they sign up. And so the thing about custom models is that you want to customize them very early on in your projects. If you do not do this and you put data into your project, a lot of it, or you put it on a live production database, and then you need to customize it later on, it is a major pain in the butt. There is a 10-year-old ticket, I think, on Django related to user migrations. It is a very thorny problem that has not been sorted out yet. So the best way to deal with custom models is to do them early and before you put any database, any data into the database, because that way you can just like blow up the whole database and start over again if you need to. So let's have a look at some of our code here, because we went ahead and put in our template a custom model for you related to alt text. So let's go over to our custom media folder and head down to the models area. And let me make sure I got my notes. Yep, okay. So I just wanted to highlight this because I wanted you guys to know that we already put one in for you. Normally this is something that you would set up, and I do have a link in the next step section of the repo for how to do that if you ever have to do it from scratch. But pretty much what we did, it's honestly not that hard as long as you do it at the very beginning of your project. But the key reason to do this for accessibility reasons is by default, the Wagtail does not have alt text in its image model. And by default, it takes all of the titles of images and uses that as the alt text. And that is not a good thing. Because usually what your editors put in as a title for an image is what they're searching for when they need to find it in the bajillion images that are in their image library. And that is not always the most useful text. Like if you're a screen reader and you come across thing that says photo of speaker from PyCon 2024, it's not descriptive. It'll help, like, you know, the person who's like doing the content on the back end. But you want to make sure that you have a specific field dedicated to alt text. So like you can be able to separate that title from the description that goes into the alt text. And another good reason to do this is it gives you an opportunity to have a separate field so that images can be decorative. Not every image that you put on a website needs to be read by a screen reader. Like, because if you like have a bunch of decorations with starbursts or something like that, because your designer for some reason decided they like starbursts and wanted to put them everywhere, you know, as a screen reader user, it would be really annoying to have to go through every one of those. So in order to make, and another common need another reason for customizing the image model is to add a caption field, which is another common need. Usually when you have an image in a piece of content, you also need a caption telling people what it looks like. Some people like to keep use the alt text and the caption and make them the same thing, but honestly sometimes you need both, because sometimes there's a difference between what the caption says and what a screen reader needs to see. Well, it needs to read, let me put it that way. That would be the appropriate way to put it. So pretty much what we have in this code here is we're adding this additional field, and then we're also telling Wagtail to, similar to the structure, add a field and then tell it where it needs to go in the admin. And so that's the same structure that we have here. And also, whenever you customize the image model, you have to customize what's called the rendition model as well, which helps with the image processing. So that piece needs to be put in there as well. And there's also a little bit of meta as well. So I mostly wanted to bring this up because custom models are something that almost made me run for the hills when I first used Django. And I always bring it up in my talks. But in this particular case for accessibility, we definitely need one. All right, so let's move on to step 4. And this is where we have our basic blog structures. So most of this is already set up for you, again, to save a bit of time. We'll go through a little bit of it, but we're also going to show you how to add Wagtail stream field, which is something that editors really, really like. So right now, under blog in this directory, in your models.py file, you should have already in here 2 models. So like I said earlier, Wagtail has parent pages and child pages. And usually when you name a parent page, you give it a name of like something index page. So because it's an index that like holds all the pages that go into it. And so right now we have a pretty simple page here, and usually index pages don't need a lot to them. Some are fancier than others. We just gave ours a basic intro. But when you have the child page, like where all the individual blogs are going to live, we definitely need a bit more information. Like whenever you're structuring your models, think about like what data is this content person going to need on a page. Like for a blog, you're going to need a date, a summary, which, you know, the intro can be, like, because the summary goes on the homepage so that people can decide what they want to read. And then you always need body text, because where else is the story going to go? And then similar to so one thing that's slightly different to the structure that we had earlier, like we have our fields up here and our content panels down here. One thing that's slightly different in this page is we've added something called search fields. In Wagtail, you need to designate which fields are searchable according to the search, because sometimes it's not appropriate to have a field searchable, like if you have some documents that are not for public consumption or something like that, which is why we leave it up to the developers to decide which ones are searchable. All right. Anybody have any questions about how this is structured and how the blog is organized? All right, because we're going to get back to doing some coding here. Now, let me bring back the other browser. All right, I'm going to show you real quick what a blog page looks like on the back end. Because usually, so I'm going to go ahead and add a child page, and when I do that, you'll see that I have two options now. I can add another home page, or I can add a blog index page, which is the page that we just created. So I'm going to go ahead and do that really quickly. Give it a real generic name, Badger blog.
And just to note, you don't have to do this. We'll run a seed script in a moment that will give you some predefined pages.
Yeah. So I'm just kind of giving you guys the ability to see this page. Go ahead and publish that. And I'm also going to go ahead and add a page here so that you can see right now what the different options are for the blog. I'm not going to fill this all the way out. Badger Bonanza, why not? We'll go with that. But these are all the fields that you just created in your code right here. We have our post date, the intro, and right now this body here has some options in it. You can, the rich text field by default has a few options in it. But I can tell you right now, if you talk to any of your content people, they would find this pretty limiting. This is not a lot of options for them. They like to have more control over how the pages are structured and how things are organized. This is where Wagtail stream field comes in, and we are going to give them a few more options for how to organize things on their page. All right. So to do that, we need to have our blog page models file open. We're going to update our import statements at the top. So you should have a big chunk of code to copy over that includes things like stream field, embed block, all our different blocks. So this is similar to I think Wagtail had blocks before WordPress had blocks, but the blocks terminology is pretty much what we're going to be giving our editors, is the ability to mix and match little content blocks on their page. And the great thing about blocks is that you can customize them too and make things like forms and stuff that they don't have to set up themselves, which is super handy. All right, we're going to add one custom block to our file right here under the imports, though. Scott is going to walk you through how to organize them in a more programmatic way, but we're going to just put them here right now. So this is a heading block right here. And so we also want to make sure that the heading block has a template so that it can know how to render it. Every time you add a block, you also need to tell Wagtail what that block is going to look like on the front end. So we're going to go under My Blog to Templates, and we're going to add a new directory right here, a new folder, and we're going to call that Blocks. And this, again, is to make your front end people happy and keep all your styles in blocks. And we're going to give it a name. The name doesn't matter as much as when you create names for your templates for pages and things like that, there is a convention. But for blocks, it can be pretty much whatever you want to do. But of course, you want to make it make sense. All right, heading block.html, and it's going to be pretty much a basic line here, just a few variables like we're capturing the size of the heading, the text, and putting that there. All right, we're going to go back to our blog models here. And we're going to add a little chunk of code that will give you the stream field piece. And we're going to, under the blog page model, we're going to replace body right here, this line, with our stream field code. Remove that extra indent. All right, so basically what this chunk of code is saying is that we're now going to give our editors the ability to use a heading block, a rich text block, an image block, and what's called an embed block. And the embed block is for things like YouTube videos, so that they can import things that have an embed code directly into Wagtail. All right, we're gonna save all that. It should already be in there if you have the file.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Some of the Django standard folder naming stuff has weird redundancies.
Weird redundancies. Yes, that is definitely true. All right. So we have now made changes to our models. Does anybody know what we need to do next? Give the man a prize. All right. So I still have my server running. I'm going to stop that.
While she's doing that, I'll mention really quickly that what we've added to the stream field is not really any more options than we had before with the rich text field, but it creates a somewhat better interface and then sets the foundation for you to add more custom blocks later.
All right, so we ran python manage.py make migrations, and now we're gonna do python manage.py migrate. And I'm gonna go ahead, and while we're here, let's go ahead and load up the code that Scott included with our demo script. Oh, what are you doing? Stop it. Interesting. Thank you. Go away. All right. So again, to save a little bit of time, we have some demo pages that are already ready to go. Before we run the server again, let's go ahead and run that command. Python manage. And this is honestly a good example of a management command too, which you, at some point, if you develop in Django or Wagtail, you're going to have to do a management command at some time. So python manage.py, and then we're going to run seed data, which should have this nice little green check mark at the end. After we do that, python manage.py, which you can tell you'll get to learn real quickly. Run server, bring back our server. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and go back to home. We won't save this, we'll leave it. All right, so if you go to pages, home, you should see right now, like if you saved your blog page, it'll still be there, but it won't conflict with the demo blog index here. We're going to go ahead and click into this and have a look at our demo blog post here. And mostly because what I want to show you is now, instead of just that regular body, see how it's broken up into blocks here? And if you click on any of these plus signs here, you can insert a new block. And you can also reorder them and move them around and things like that. So this makes it so that your editors can like put images in places or headings, or like another common use is like pull text. They usually do pull quotes. They like to pull out a quote from the content and highlight that in a fancy way. And so and blocks can also be like calls to action. Do we have any marketing people who know what that one is? Calls to action are like those annoying, like, buy now, sign up here. That's very important to marketing people. So you can give them blocks for that so that they don't have to like set it up manually over and over again. We commonly on wagtail.org use it for our newsletter sign up form. So has everybody got things set up and the seed data in place? Feeling pretty good about this? Okay. All right, because we are ready to switch off. Do you want to do 15 minutes before we get to the break?
The page in the front end as it is.
Okay, yeah, let's do that. Yes.
You might have forgotten to save heading block.html.
I did. Okay. Well, does it matter at this point? All right. All right, we're going to do a little switcheroo here. And
Sorry. So this is the end of step 4. Technically, we have our basic blog set up, and then starting in step 5, we will do more to address the accessibility issues that we want to talk about.
yeah, Scott, the reason we did some of the seed data is that Scott put some broken stuff in there already so that you can see how we're going to fix it. It would be a little hard to like have you fix things without some data at the beginning.
It would probably, rather than trying to do anything in the 10 minutes before the break, it would probably make sense to just break slightly early. Your coffee and treats and whatever, if they're not out yet, should be out in 10 minutes. But if we could maybe start if we could end the break a little bit early, maybe at like 20 minutes, 3:20 p.m., let's say. If everybody could be back by 3, is that right? Yeah, 3:20.
3:20.
We will resume in force at that time, and then, we'll be here if anybody needs help getting caught up to this position. We'll come and help you do that during the break as well.
You have a question? Okay.
Yeah, we'll come to you. So let's break and see you at 3:20.
All right, folks. And if you didn't get a sticker, we have some up here.
All right, let's ease back into it, everyone. Welcome back. I wanted to know that the pace is a little bit quick, perhaps, and it can be easy to get behind. Sorry about that. As I said to somebody during the break, trying to strike the right balance between moving at a reasonable pace, but also making you feel like you get your money's worth out of this thing. So we're covering a lot, I think. But reminder, go to the repository and follow along in each of the numbered step branches. All of any code that you need to run or paste into your editor is right there in those README files on those branches, and in the files of that branch, if you want to refer to it in context. There again is the repository address. So let's get back into it. We're going to start talking about the Wagtail accessibility checker. And this is something you may have encountered if you've been exploring on your own, as we have been going through the tutorial so far. But the accessibility checker is a little over a year old now, released in Wagtail 4.2, and we're now up to 6.1. And it's one of our hallmark features of our efforts to improve the accessibility of sites that are built with Wagtail. We're also trying to do a lot to improve the accessibility of the Wagtail admin interface itself. But for improving the sites you build with it, the accessibility checker is one of the top things we're using to empower editors to know what's going on their website. It's built on the Axe engine from DQ Systems. It's a tool that can run a wide range of automated accessibility tests. It has its own browser extension that you may have heard of, and it powers a lot of other tools like Google's Lighthouse, and again, the Wagtail accessibility checker. As I said, the goal is to make it easy for content editors to identify the accessibility issues that they can address themselves. like Meagen talked about earlier, there's a number of things that only developers can deal with, but content editors also have the responsibility, and the accessibility checker can point out things that they might be unaware of. So to try it out, it shows up if you are logged into the Wagtail admin, then on your front end, the accessibility checker shows up in the Wagtail user bar, which is this bird icon down here in the lower right-hand corner of a page. And you can see it's already indicating one error in the template code we provided to you. So we'll pop this open, click the word accessibility, and see what it's telling us. We have an empty heading found. Use meaningful text for screen readers. An empty heading obviously is not meaningful, but a screen reader will, if you're stepping through the headings, will try to announce what it is. It's pointing to this invisible heading down here in the footer. You click the locator icon to see where on the page it's finding an issue. Sorry, there we go. All right, and this is not actually the only error that we introduced. Some of them are not being displayed because, as we mentioned previously, it's for editors to find things. So the default configuration of the accessibility checker leaves out many of the errors that Axe can display, but that only a developer can address. So we recommend to developers that you enable the display of all possible errors when you are logged in as an admin level user, so that you can be made aware of those errors that you should fix in your own code. To do this, we will use a Wagtail hook, which is a bit of code that runs anytime Wagtail sees code in a wagtail_hooks.py file, it will run it, and there are a huge range of hooks that you can see in the documentation for when you want to execute certain Python code at a certain point in Wagtail's execution or rendering processes. So I'm going to copy this code again from the first block in the step 5 README, and I'm going to put this in my home application. I'm going to create a new file. Again, the name needs to be wagtail_hooks.py. Paste in the content that I copied from the README. And what this is doing is when it loads this hooks file, it will use the construct Wagtail user bar hook to replace the stock accessibility item with the custom accessibility item that we are subclassing from that. And what we're doing is if the request is coming from a super user, an admin user, then we will not limit what rules the accessibility checker runs. I'm going to save this, turn to my browser, refresh the home page. And what have I messed up here? What have I messed up? Oh, that's right. When you're adding a new hooks file that's never been seen before, the Wagtail server needs to know that it exists, so I need to stop my development server and rerun run server. And now it will pick it up, and I'll refresh the page. And now we see 3 errors. A whole new class of error, which has found 2 of them. All page content should be contained by landmarks. And it's pointing at this .header area and this anonymous div here in the middle. So let's look at why it's doing that. If we go to our base template in my blog templates base.html, we haven't looked at this previously in the tutorial, but again, like Meagen said, this is what typically in a Django application will outline the basic, most top-level HTML structure of the page. So you got your HTML tag, your head, and then the body. And here, the item of class header that it pointed to is the first thing that it found. And in this case, we could solve this issue by applying a role equals banner attribute, I'm sorry, let me take one step back and explain what the issue is. All page content should be contained by landmark, was what it said. Landmarks are used by assistive technology to help users navigate between the major areas of a page: headers, navigation areas, the main content, footers, etc. And this is an example of the kind of error that has to be done in code, can't really be addressed by a content editor. So we could fix this by applying a role attribute to change its landmark, the landmark of this div, to banner. But a better practice is to use newer HTML elements, such as the header element itself, which has an implicit role of banner. So if we just change this div to a header, save, and refresh, you'll see that the error count has gone down by 1, and we're now seeing this error only on the body div, which we can fix here by changing this anonymous div to the main element, which is what it sounds like. It should be the main content area of your page. And I'm also going to add an ID to this, which can be a very useful hook for something like a skip to main content link, which is a practice we haven't included in this tutorial, but would strongly recommend that any page would include to a user. The first thing that a user tabs to on a page would be a skip to main content link that's hidden visually, but appears when focus is applied to it, and it jumps over all the header and navigation stuff down to the most important content on the page. That way a screen reader user or a keyboard user doesn't have to go through all of that stuff that's the same on every page as they navigate around your site. So save this file, refresh the page again, and we're back to the one error that we had of the empty heading. This error is actually fixable in a sort of a hidden way by an editor, but if we look at the template again, what we are putting in this H2 that is empty is the current site's name. The site being the Wagtail site configured in the back end. Wagtail naturally has support for multi-site setup, and the sites within, we only have one in this case, but it is still a site. So if we go to the admin area and go to settings, sites, we have this one default site configuration, which doesn't come with a name by default. But if we edit it, we can put in our site name here, Badger Bonanza, save that, return to our home page, refresh it, and we see it has appeared in the H2 down here, and the accessibility checker is happy for now. We tried out the Wagtail accessibility checker and fixed some common issues, so let's dig deeper on some of the more common accessibility issues that we see out there. Moving on to step 6, so if you want to change your branch to step 6, we'll continue there. And this step is all about using custom validation. One thing that you haven't visually encountered yet as we've worked with our pages and made some changes and saved them is that behind the scenes, Wagtail or Django is looking at all of the content that you put in your fields and validating it to make sure that everything is, if it's required, that it's there at all, or if there are other restrictions, like if you had a URL field, that it meets the standard format of a URL. So we can use custom validation to add in our own validation requirements for specific things. So let's look at one of the most common and easily addressable accessibility errors out there, incorrect heading hierarchy. So let's look at the example blog post that we created for you. We have 2 errors showing up here, and they're both about incorrect heading hierarchy, avoid skipping levels. First one is pointing at this H3, and the second one is pointing at this H4. The issue here is that we have an H2 at the top, a of the content, but we are skipping right to H4 on the lower level heading with no H3 in between. And actually above, we have the H1 of Hello World, and we're skipping to level 3 here with no H2 in between. Why is this important? Screen readers and site crawlers rely on having a logical document structure to understand the content of your page, and headings are the primary way in which they interpret that structure. One way to think about this is like when you were in high school, you probably had to write a big research report, and your teacher probably had you do a giant numbered outline in your word processor, and you had Roman numeral I, and then letter A, and number 1, and all that thing. So if you were building this outline and you indented things 2 levels at the same time in one go, that would look pretty confusing. So this is how you can also think about the structure of your web page, and your structure should avoid skipping levels because that's how they make that outline. Hopefully your editors would see this warning in the accessibility checker and go back into their editor and correct it. But you can also do more to help them avoid this mistake using custom validation to prevent even saving the page if such an error exists. So if we look at this page in the editor, go back to pages, through the home, through the index, and edit our Hello World page. You can see that the heading in question is entered into a heading block in the body stream field, first H3 here. And Wagtail 5 introduced some new ways to validate stream field blocks so that we can more easily point editors right to where errors like this are occurring. Core developer Matt Westcott was a contributor of this excellent feature. It's pretty simple using this to validate whether or not the headings in a stream field are in a proper order when an editor attempts to save the page. So to take advantage of this new functionality, we need to slightly adjust the structure of how we defined our stream field. And instead of listing the possible blocks directly within the stream field declaration, which that looks, go back to our blog models. Here in our stream field definition, we listed these blocks individually directly in the stream field definition. What we're going to do instead is create a stream block class that we can apply our custom validation to. A stream block class, I want to emphasize that. So first we're going to create a new blocks.py file to house this stuff in the blog app, blocks.py. And we'll do this so we don't start to overload the models.py file. So we had put in models.py this heading block, but if you do more than a couple of these, you want to start a separate file to help keep things organized and of a reasonable length. So we're going to cut and paste this heading block out of models.py and place it in our new blocks.py. And we're going to need to import some things to make this work. So I've got those imports are in the README as well. I'll paste those in here at the top. And it's warning me that there are some things in here we're not using yet, but that, and also, not only do we need to copy from models.py into blocks.py, we also need to, instead of importing from Wagtail import blocks, what we're doing now is creating a list of all of the specific blocks that we want to import. And in doing so, we can remove all of the blocks dot prefixes from down here. So now we have some things we're importing and actually using, some things that we're importing but not yet using, and we'll get there. Now we want to create the base stream block, which is again a way to define the options of a stream field in another location so that you can potentially use it in more than one stream field. So we're using this base stream block. We will be using it in the blog page model. but you might want to put it in some other kind of page model too, and that would avoid repeatedly redefining the same stream field everywhere. You can just always import and call this base stream block. So we'll save blocks.py, and now back in models.py, we'll replace our body field definition from a complete stream field to a reference to the base stream block, which we also need to import from the new blocks.py file. So I've copied the import line, and I'm putting it down here from blog.blocks, import base stream block. Save that. With all of this saved, all of these changes that we've just made should have changed absolutely nothing about what the backend thinks is going on. So if I just refresh my editor page now, everything should still be fine, and it is. And you can also do a dry run with the make migrations command to make sure that Django agrees that there are no actual changes that were material to the database that we just made. So now we are ready, with the rearranging done, we can now add our custom validation check to the heading hierarchy on save. If you are familiar with Django, you may be aware that you can override models on the class that you are inheriting from. So in this case, the stream blocks.py. In this case, the base stream block is inheriting from the stream block. So we can override the clean method that we are getting from stream block with our own clean method. So I'm going to copy this code out of the README and add it down here, redefining the clean method. So what this does is the first thing it does is it calls the original clean method from stream block to make sure everything is fine with all of the base level validation, and then we add our own. What this method does is it creates a list of all of the headings on the page, in the stream field, all of the heading blocks. And to do this, we start with an empty heading list, and it's a combination, a list of tuples, which have the index of the block, just a number of where it is in the page, and then the level of the heading as an integer. And I put in this mock one. The H1 is not technically part of the stream field, but we know it's on the page. So we'll put that at index 0 and add a 1 for it being the level 1 heading. Then we're going to iterate through all of the blocks in the stream block, and that comes in the result from the original clean method. So looping through all of these blocks, we check to see if it's a block of type heading. If it is, convert its size string, which starts with an H. So chop off that H, convert it to an integer. That gives us our level. And then we append the tuple for that, its block index and its level, to the list we created up here, the list of headings. Once we have that complete list of headings, now we're just going to iterate again through that list. We start with the second one because we don't need to check the H1, there's nothing above it. So we start with the second heading on the page and compare its level to sorry about the tooltips that keep popping up. Compare its level to the previous heading's level, and if that difference is more than 1, then we have skipped a level and that's an error. We need to create a validation error here for that incorrect heading hierarchy. And we add that to a list of errors. And if there is anything in that list at the end, then we raise the stream block validation error, passing it that list of errors. So save this custom clean method, return to the editor, and this type of change does not require any kind of migration because it doesn't affect what happens in the database. It's all about what is happening in the user interface. return to the editor, and if we try to save a new draft, even without making any changes, we have our validation error. And it points at the first heading on the list, incorrect heading hierarchy, avoid skipping levels. We know that's because it was an H1 above, we skipped the H2, now we're on H3. But if I change this to an H2, change that just to keep it straight in my mind, the text of it, save again, we've cleared the validation error and all is well. Okay. You may have noticed that and also we can refresh the page. Sorry, let me publish the change, not just save it as a draft, so we can see that the error count here has gone down by 1. And we also have an error within the rich text block. So let's go back to the edit here. Since our rich text block was set up with the default options, then within the rich text block itself, headings can still be created. Even though we have a heading block in the stream field, they can also still be created within the rich text block. So we'll need to add a little bit of additional code to our custom clean method to handle headings within the rich text block, because they're represented differently in the database. So first we need to add a new import of the regular expression library, because that will come into play here. And then we're going to add a condition when we are looping through the blocks in the stream block. We were originally checking only for heading, but now we also want to check the name of our rich text block was paragraph. And one other thing to point out, like these names here, heading, paragraph, image, embed, these are arbitrary. They can be whatever you want them to be. So this could be rich text or something like that. But this is the name we're referring to when we are checking the block type down here. So if it's one of our rich text blocks, look for headings within it, and because it represents data in a rich text block as just HTML, that's why we use our regular expression to find any tags, any HTML tags beginning with H and having a digit following of 2 through 6. For each one of those we find, we add those to the same headings list that we were building with the heading block. And then the iteration through the headings is the same. And now if we return to the editor and try to save another draft, now we're getting the validation error thrown on the rich text block. If a rich text block contains multiple headings, it won't be able to pinpoint which one specifically has the problem, but it will at least clue in the editor to check the entire block and see which of the headings in there are causing the problem. So that is our custom validation of heading levels. A couple of notes that we're not going to go into, but I want you to be aware of. Wagtail also has a rich text field, which is a standard Django model field that can be used to provide a rich text editor outside of a stream field context. And in that situation, you could subclass rich text field and add your own custom clean method to that. And if you have a page that supports a combination of stream field and rich text field, or maybe even has other kinds of fields that could result in a heading on a rendered page, you can override the clean method of the page model itself, looping through every heading that could possibly come through the page, build a complete list of them, and check each of those in succession. Our custom validation will help editors ensure that they are using their headings accessibly, but don't forget to make sure that any heading elements that are hard-coded into templates are also following a logical hierarchy. That's part of the developer responsibility. Okay, we are at the end of step 6, moving on to step 7. Images and alt text. We've talked about this a little bit already. It's probably something that a lot of you are familiar with if you've done web development for a decent amount of time, but just to recap, alt text is a way to provide a textual alternative of an image to screen readers, which is not displayed visibly, so that people cannot see the image, can hear what it is depicting. This is done using the alt attribute on an image element. They're also useful, as you may have experienced in your life. If an image fails to load, you'll usually see the alt text in the space where the image would be. So it's useful for that reason too. The key question to ask yourself when considering alt text for an image is what description of this image would be useful to someone who's hearing this page read aloud? Bear in mind the answer may be none. Like Meagen referred to, decorative images do not need alt text if hearing a description of them would not be useful. You don't want to be hearing the starburst, starburst, starburst as you go all the way down the page. But the way the spec is, all image elements must have an alt attribute, and if the image is decorative, that should just be left empty. You can find many articles on how to write good alt text, so I'm not going to go too deeply into that, but let's discuss how we want to implement it in Wagtail. Again, the stock implementation of alt text in Wagtail is under active development, so this is the best advice we have as of the date today, but Wagtail has never had a field for alt text in its default image model, which is why we added the default alt text earlier. So our current recommendation is threefold. Add that default alt text field to your custom image model and use that to output the alt text instead of the image's title field. 2, add alt text fields and is decorative checkboxes alongside image choosers in the context of your page content. And we'll get to that in a minute. 3, write your templates to use the in-context alt field if present, or fall back on the default alt text from the model, unless it's decorative. Any given image that you upload to your image library could be used in many places throughout a site, so it's important that the alt text be relevant to the context that a specific instance of an image is placed in. So we want to prioritize entering the text entered at the point where an image is used, or respect the decision that it needs none. But where neither of those things are true, then we can fall back on the default from the model. So, for Wagtail stream fields, the best approach for adding alt text in context is to create a custom image block that incorporates the image chooser, the optional alt text field, and the decorative checkbox. When initially setting up our stream field, we added a basic image chooser block, the built-in Wagtail image chooser, which simply creates the button that you used to select the image for your home page. And we're going to replace that with a custom struct block, which is similar to the heading block that we already created, that combines the image chooser block with our 2 new fields. So let's go back to blocks.py and add one thing we need to import here, which is a Boolean block, code for checkbox, right? Then we're going to create a new image block class, subclassing, let's paste this in here and then talk about it. Creating a new image block class. We're subclassing struct block. We didn't really talk about this earlier, but what a struct block is a combination of other simpler blocks in a specific order. So we have the image chooser block, the basic image chooser block, which we were using earlier, a new character block for the alt text, and a new Boolean block for the isDecorative flag. In the class meta, we can give the block an icon so that it is easier to pick out from the block chooser, and we're going to set up a custom block for it like we did for the heading, custom template for it like we did for the heading block. Also note that the alt text and decorative checkboxes must be set to required false. The default is required true, but if these are not false, then you would have to fill them out, which you don't always want to do if you just want to rely on the default alt text. So with this custom block in place, then we move down to the base stream block and replace the image block, replace image chooser block with our new image block that we just created. Okay. With this set, we can go back to our editor, refresh the page here without worrying about changes. And we can see if we go to insert a new block in our body stream field, we have our, again, it was in its with set image before, so this looks the same, but if we add it, we now have not just a button, but the button and our two new fields. So now let's set up our custom template for this. Back in our My Blog templates blocks folder, create a new file for image block.html, block, not block. And we're going to copy this content into it. This gnarly if-else logic here says that if we've marked it as decorative, we're going to pass it an empty alt attribute, like we talked about, so that screen readers will ignore it. Otherwise, if the block's alt text child block has been populated, we'll pass that to the alt text. And otherwise, we'll fall back on the image itself, the default alt text field from that. Quick aside about this image tag here, we glossed over it before, but this is a default template tag provided by the Wagtail images module, and you pass it at least two parameters: the image that you want to render, a sizing filter, and then there are other additional options such as overriding the alt attribute. And it will output things in good format. It's got built-in support for responsive image sizes and things like that too. So this is saved, and we will create one of these. We'll choose the Badger image again. And if I do nothing with alt text and decorative, well, first I need to fix my bad heading down here. Switch this in the rich text field from H3 to H4 to H3. All right. We've got our Badger. Publish the change here. And we can see by default, if I inspect this, the alt it's a Badger, which is what I'd put when I uploaded the image the first time. And as you know, wasn't in the editor. I can change this, put in block level alt text here, publish that, refresh, and the alt has changed to the block level alt text we just put in. Finally, if I mark off the decorative checkbox, the alt attribute is now empty. So template's doing what we wanted it to do. But you may have noticed there's no indication in the editing interface that the decorative checkbox will take precedence over that block level alt text field. So we could add even more help text to indicate that, but users would still be able to populate both the alt text field and check the decorative checkbox. So to make things extra clear for our users, we can again utilize some custom validation to validate that they're either using the alt text field or marking as decorative, but not both. So the first thing we'll do is add a new import again to our blocks.py file. Struct block validation error, very similar to the stream block validation error that we used before. And we'll set up a custom clean method in our image block class moving down to image block. I like to put my custom methods and properties before the class meta, but that's up to how you want to organize it. So again, we get the result of the default clean on a struct block. And then we have a very simple check here, much simpler than the heading loops. If the result out of the clean has a value for both alt text and the decorative checkbox, that's our error. We raise a struct block validation error straight away. You could pick either field to point it at, but I picked alt text, and the error text I put here, marking an image as decorative, will override alt text, enter here, empty this field, or uncheck the decorative checkbox. So save that, return to the editor. And since we had already done this, had both things set, if I try to save again, we have our error. So I'll clear out the alt text, save again, and we're happy. If you find this to be heavy-handed, if editors chafe at this kind of this much strong arming with validation, that's okay. Adding help text may be perfectly adequate, depending on the editors that you're working with. Another potential use of custom validation, though, is for preventing the entry of bad alt text. For example, alt text beginning with phrases like picture of or image of should be avoided because screen readers already indicate to their users that what they're about to talk about is a picture. We can add to our custom clean method to address this as well. I'm going to copy this code in. Before we return, we're just going to add another way, another thing that could raise a validation error here in the clean method. So I've got a list of phrases here: graphic of, image of, pic of, picture of, photo of, and photograph of. And if the alt text starts with any of those phrases, we want to raise an error. We give it some basic alt text. Do not start alt text with redundant phrases like image of. That's a good way to prevent bad alt text from happening. Not the only way. There are many other potential ways you could think about to validate whether you've got good alt text or not, such as if it's a file name, if somebody put the file name in there, which is probably not something somebody would do intentionally, but there are other ways that you could add to this clean method to look for alt text that you think is of a concern. Now, looking back at our block template, this is some pretty gnarly logic to put in a template. This is an aside from the accessibility piece, but I think is an interesting Wagtail feature for you all to know about. Let's move some of this logic into Python using Wagtail's concept struct value. Struct value is a means of adding custom data to a struct block in addition to the standard values of its child blocks. So we'll go back to blocks.py, import struct value, and we'll create a subclass of struct value that we'll use to compute We'll use this subclass to compute what we want the alt text to be, depending on what fields in the block have been set, if either of them have been. So if when the block is being evaluated for template rendering, if the decorative field has been set, then we will set this new alt property to an empty string. Otherwise, we return the block's alt text value if it is there, or fall back on the image's default alt text value. So again, this is going into a custom property of alt, which does not exist on either the image model object itself or the image block. With this in place, we can return, one other thing. We have to attach the image struct value to the block itself. Here in the class meta, we add a value class image struct value. Finally, our template file becomes much, much simpler. We can remove all of that logic and simply pass to the alt argument of the image tag the new alt property that we just added in the value class. I'll save this and return to the page in the browser. Remember, we already had isDecorative checked, so we can see that the alt text is still empty. And just for completeness of the demonstration, we'll uncheck it and not set alt text, and it reverts to it's a badger, which was the default alt text. And I'm not going to put in the new field. Trust me, it works. Much cleaner. The conventional wisdom in the Django community encourages moving as much logic as possible out of your templates and into Python. But both approaches work, and ultimately it's up to you to decide what you prefer. To quickly comment on the future of alt text in Wagtail, what we've just gone through is the current best practice for handling image alt text in Wagtail. But there is an active effort underway to further improve the default alt handling. We've just launched a Google Summer of Code project to implement a Wagtail proposal that is focused on providing that default field on the model, but also some of the things where you're choosing an image, having automatic places to enter that contextual alt text or mark it as decorative. And also we're exploring ways to, if people want, they could hook up their Wagtail instance to a large vision model, AI, whatever the buzzword are, to look at the image you've uploaded and suggest some default alt text for it, which can be quite valuable. We've had some pretty good success in our experiments with how reliably it can do that and give you a reasonable default. But even when it does that, remember, what is it in context? Should the alt text be more specific to the context or not there at all? So stay tuned for that stuff coming soon to Wagtail. That's the end of step 7, and we're moving on to step 8. Making much better time than I expected. Is everybody following along okay? Any questions? Cool. We got ways to fill the time later. So, step 8, helping editors help themselves. To close out the coding portion of the tutorial, we'll take a look at how we can provide more timely guidance to editors while they are editing their content, and before potentially getting interrupted by a validation error. You probably noticed the help text attribute that we included in our custom image block. And if you have experience in Django, this is probably a concept that's very familiar to you, but it's simply a way for developers to provide hints about a field to a user while they're editing it. So if we look back at our image block class, here's the help text we had put on our 2 alt text and decorative fields. And it's okay, but we can improve upon it. We could add additional context and a link to further guidance. And to do that, Django by default enforces that help text is plain text only. But there's some security reasons for doing that. You want to make sure you're not taking in text from users that could include a script tag or something and create a security vulnerability. But when we know that we are manually hard-coding this text, we can use a Django utility called markSafe. And using the markSafe utility will let us use HTML within our help text. So I've imported that at the top, and then I'm going to update the alt text here, the alt text help text, to something like this. Enter a text alternative to be displayed if images fail to load or to be read by screen reader software, and overrides the image's default alt text, which we didn't mention before. Or we did. We didn't mention the first part before. And here's a link to learn more about writing good alt text. For users that aren't familiar with it, they might want to use that to find out what to do. It's still, even that extensive help text may not be clear enough for people who are new to the concept. So having a link to more information is great. Explains what the field actually does and offers that extra context. Just to show you what that looks like in the editor now. It fits in here underneath, between the title of the field and the field itself. Now, looking back at the heading block, we didn't have any alt text in this before. So here's an example of what I would suggest adding to the size field to help head off those incorrect heading hierarchy level errors. Under the choices, we add the help text. Please ensure that you do not skip heading levels. For example, the next heading after an H2 should only be either an H3 or another H2, and learn more about accessible heading structure at the link provided. And that looks in the editor something like that. All right. Now, sometimes you might find yourself in a situation where it'd be a better user experience to give guidance at a whole page level rather than on individual fields. For example, let's say you have an image gallery page type. In this situation, you probably wouldn't want to use our existing image block because, number one, each image in that context would never be decorative, so you don't need that checkbox, and alt text is required. And if you're adding a large arbitrary number of images to the page, seeing that identical help text on the alt text field every time would start to get noisy and redundant. Wagtail has, for this situation, something called a help panel. Rather than a typical editor panel that provides some sort of form widget for entering content, the help panel is a way to provide some read-only content to your editors. Here's, I'm just going to copy this example of what an image gallery page model might look like and how we could use help panel there. So in our blog models.py file, I'll come down here and I'm going to do something somewhat uncouth and put all these imports here that I'm going to need. Just so I could paste it all from the README. This will work fine. If you use any kind of linting or formatting setup, it's going to complain about it, but it will work fine. Normally, I would move all of these to the top and sort them and everything, and that would be fine. But for now, it will work. But here's our image gallery page model. Like the blog index page, we might just want a rich text field to give an introduction to what the gallery is about. But then the main thing will be our image selections itself. And these don't require a new field on the image gallery page. So this is also a good time to talk a little bit about another common Wagtail pattern that you might want to be aware of, the use of an inline panel. An inline panel used here lets you insert any number of standard Django fields or combinations of fields without using a stream field. So it will create a repeater sort of interface. And let me just save this really quick and show you what it looks like. And another aside, I'm skipping over the part where you do migrations because dirty little secret is if you're just messing around, you don't actually have to do them. So here under Badger Bonanza, if I can go to edit a child page, I can now add the image gallery page. Image gallery. Here's our intro that I'm going to leave blank for now. Here is our inline images field, and as noted, you can add any number of them. Each one of them requires that you choose an image and has an alt text field with no help text. Jumping back to the code. Those two fields for the image gallery image are defined down here. I don't think I intended to write image 3 times in the name of this class, but I did. This is a subclass of orderable, which is an orderable is an abstract class that lets these things be rearranged. So if I had, and I wanted to move this image to the top, you can swap them around with these up and down arrows, like stream field blocks, but again, these are just raw Django models. And the image itself is required. Alt text is not required by blank equals true. And we give it panels. Again, panels are the Wagtail way of saying, put something in the UI for this to be edited. So this itself has the 2 panels for the image and the alt text. And this has a related, the foreign key to the page, the image gallery page that you are connecting this image to has a related name of gallery images, and we invoke that on the inline panel, and that's what creates the interface we saw in the editor here. It's a pretty complicated concept to explain verbally, but there's really good documentation on it, and you can look at this code and see how it works. Back to the whole help panel thing, though. Here's our help panel. I created a single help panel. Let's look at the code first. In the regular content panels for our image gallery, between the intro and the images panels, I've created a help panel. And I gave it a horizontal rule for some visual separation. I'm using, you don't need to use mark safe in this instance. The help panel is designed to take HTML in its content argument. So I'm using that straight away with no mark safe. And then look at the rendered result here. The alt text field is for entering a text alternative to be displayed if images fail to load or to be read by screen reader software. If one is not entered below, the image's default alt text will be used. And then again, the link to write more about writing good alt text. So hopefully editors who are creating an image gallery page will read this once and apply that to all of the images that they select here for their gallery. Yes, a couple of notes. We did not include a template for this, but you are welcome to try adding one on your own. A couple of hints about that. Meagen talked about the naming conventions for templates. So if you wanted to just add a template with no configuration required, you would put it at myblog/templates/image_gallery_page.html. This is in the README if you want to refer to that later. That follows the conventional Django and Wagtail template location pattern. And we left off the decorative checkbox because the images in a gallery context should always have alt text. And you could refer back to the original implementation of image block if you wanted to just use a simple if-else statement to determine which alt text to output, either the one from the field here or the default on the image model. Because in this situation, we cannot do the stream value thing. There is an analogous thing of adding a custom property on the Django model if you wanted to do it that way also. But when it's just one if-else, is that worth it? It's up to you. That's the end of the coding portion of the tutorial. we have more to talk about on testing and continuously evaluating the accessibility of your sites, but I'm going to pause here again and see if there are any more questions on the coding stuff. Yes? That's a good question. The question was, for the help text, could you have used a triple quoted string to avoid all of these line breaks? I'm honestly not sure. That's one of these things that I guess a habit I picked up to do it this way. It might be possible, but I honestly haven't tried. Yes?
Even if it doesn't work the way you expect it to, there's a standard library function called Meagen.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I've used ddent before. Yep. That's a standard, as the person was saying, if you didn't hear, you could use a standard library ddent method to. Yeah, the question was about using Markdown instead of HTML and to help deal with the indentation, and that might, I don't think it would be possible for the content property of a help panel because it is expecting HTML. That's true. You could use Markdown and write a helper function to translate it to HTML and save. Yeah. Good thoughts. Okay. If there's nothing else, let's return to the presentation and start talking about testing. Continuously evaluating your site's accessibility. The Wagtail accessibility checker is great and all, but it is not the only thing you need as a developer if you're committed to doing good accessibility work. There is a lot of other automated testing that you can do, and there are manual tests that you should do also. Fortunately, there are a lot of really great tools, and I've listed a bunch of them, and you might be like, oh, I can't test in all of these tools. You may not need to test in all of them, but I wanted to list them all, and we have time to demo most of them, I think, to show you how they each kind of focus on different areas, and they each have strengths and weaknesses, and will enlighten you about different things. The Axe Dev Tools, again, this is the same engine that powers Wagtail, the Wagtail accessibility checker, but the Axe Dev Tools is a browser extension that adds a panel to your browser dev tools once you've installed it. And if you click on Axe Dev Tools, you can ask it to scan your entire page. And look at this. The Wagtail homepage has 0 issues according to the Axe Dev Tools checker. But that's not really true.
No, it's not.
Next one on the list was accessibility insights. Do you want to make a comment?
Just in case we comment as we go through.
Accessibility insights is another extension. It's only available for Chrome and Edge,
Check.
but it's one of the better ones, I think, in offering multiple ways to look at the accessibility of your content. And it's much more full-featured than just the scan that the Axe plugin does. So you open it first, and there's this launchpad situation where you can run 3 quick tests in a fast pass, or you can run a quick assessment that they say might take you about 30 minutes, a full assessment, a guided walkthrough thing, and then you can run those are all different combinations of the tools that are built into Accessibility Insights, and you can also use each of the tools individually down here. But let's run a quick fast pass and see what it turns up. It opens in a new window and found no failed instances in its automated checks. But the other thing that it can help you do is visualize your tab stops. We talked a little bit about keyboard navigation. Not everybody can use a mouse. So, not everybody prefers to use a mouse. So you have to do some manual testing to make sure that the keyboard navigation, as you navigate through your page with the keyboard, everything that can be interacted with is accessible by a keyboard, and that you don't get stuck anywhere in a complex interaction. Like there's a keyboard trap where you can't then focus away from that. The tab stop helper here in Accessibility Insights, you can turn on the visual indicator, and then once you do that, if you start tabbing through, once you get to the page content, you'll start to see things. So the first thing is something we talked about earlier, is skip to main content link. And I'm not gonna activate it, I'm just gonna keep tabbing so you can see the tab stop indicators continue on. So we go to the logo, get up indicator, through the navigation, 7.8 search, get started, copy button for the pip install Wagtail command. And so one thing you can note here by seeing this count up is it takes 11 presses of the tab key to get to something that is in the main content of the page. So if you go to the next page on the Wagtail website, you would have to hit those 10 things every time, unless the first thing you tab to, you activate that skip to main content link and it goes right to the first thing on the page. So the tab stop visualizer is great, and it gives you the lines to make sure that if you're creating websites for a Western audience, you want to make sure that it generally goes left to right and then top to bottom. And so you keep going and see all the places it goes. And we're doing pretty good with this. Okay, back to the other window. Oh, and so as I've been doing this, it thinks it's found some possible failures. And one of the things to learn about accessibility testing tools is a lot can be tested for automatically, but a lot cannot. So many of the more sophisticated tools like this will tell you, hey, look at this with your human brain and make sure that this is working as intended. So what does it think here? It thinks that maybe there are keyboard navigation issues and traps, but I didn't see any. We didn't try to activate anything. Didn't see any failed instances, so these might be false positives that you don't need to worry about. But there are other things that it prompts you to check too, like each thing that you can focus on, that you move to with your keyboard, does it have a visible focus indicator? For sighted users who are using this, they got to know where the focus is at any given point as they're navigating with the keyboard. And you can record, one thing that's good about this tool is you can record results manually and then export those if you need to provide a report to somebody for compliance or something like that. Did it find anything in the needs review step? Okay, there's a few things that it wants you to check color contrast on. Color contrast is one that is also tricky for automated tools, because if it is just text on top of a background color, it can check that very easily. But if it's text on top of an image, without doing some sort of computer vision thing, it cannot calculate the numeric contrast ratio between the text and whatever background image that might be. So in this case, I guess some of these are background images that it's wanting to make sure the text, wanting to have you verify as a human that it has adequate contrast. There are a lot more tools in Accessibility Insights for Web, but I'm going to move on to the next other tool now. The IBM Equal Access Accessibility Checker. This is one I discovered recently, late last year. It's another one that plugs into your browser's dev tools on multiple browsers. And it, like Axe DevTools, you open the tab, click Scan to run an assessment. And it's found some things that the first two tools we looked at did not. Some that are legitimate. You can filter this down. It has some things that it knows are violations. It has some things that needs review by a human and some additional recommendations. Let's just look at the violations for right now. There's only one. Accessible name does not match or contain the visible label text. Something that's really nice about this tool is it has, once you've selected something to look at, it has an explanation of why it's important, a link to more information about the requirement, talk about who it affects, shows you the location, it both highlights the location and shows you a code reference for it, where it is, and tells you what to do to how to fix it. This is not code specifically to help you fix this instance. It's an example of good code that is avoiding this issue. So you still have to figure out how to apply it to your situation. But I found several issues with this tool that other ones did not, and I like their very explanatory display of what to do. What was next? Wave. Wave is old school. Meagen mentioned WebAIM earlier. The WebAIM organization, WebAIM, they have a tool called Wave, the Web Accessibility Evaluation Tool. And this is one of the more visual things that helps you. It can report on automated errors and warnings. So when you first turn it on, it comes up with this summary panel. And if you go to details, if there are errors, they would appear here at the top. But they go through the details of all of these different categories. Fortunately, no errors. There are some things that may be helpful. If it looks for possible headings. First visible one on the page, these grayed out ones indicate that they're hidden, but the first visible one on the page, you can click the icons here to jump to them on the page and it'll highlight where they are. It's just saying, this text is large. Should it be a heading? Or have you just marked it up as, a paragraph with an increased font size? If it's a heading that should be important to the structure of the page, you should probably change that. It's not in this case. This is not a heading that we want in the structure of the page. It's sort of a tagline. So we don't have to worry about this one, but it's a useful check that you may want to watch out for. Suspicious link text. Play with the code. That doesn't seem all that suspicious to me, but I'm sorry, I clicked this without saying what I'm doing. You can click the little information icon next to each of these categories of alerts to see more about what it thinks it is. This is similar to the IBM one, where it talks about why it matters and how to fix. This is the main thing that this is talking about are links that say click more or click here or read more. Having a bunch of links like that on a page is a problem because if somebody is just tabbing through the links, listening to a screen reader, they might, and you've got like a whole, a carousel of them or something, they're going to hear, read more, read more, read more, read more what? That's not very helpful. The best remedy is to provide more descriptive link text. It can be tricky to do that without it feeling redundant for sighted users who probably see something very close to it that makes it clear what it's about. And there's I don't know how much I want to go into this. You may have heard of the concept of an ARIA label attribute, which will have, if you put that on like a read more link, you could say, read more about topic XYZ, and have that be read by a screen reader instead of just read more. But there's a problem with these that has become more apparent in recent years, which is that it tends to break things for users of speech recognition software, such as voice control on Apple devices or Dragon, naturally speaking, that kind of thing. Users who use speech to control what their web browser is doing have to say, click click a link, to do that, you have to give the link text, or more precisely, the accessible name of the link. And so if you give a read more link an accessible name of read more about topic XYZ, a person who is looking at that and using voice to control things without any hands or anything, they would have to know to say, click, read more about topic XYZ, but if that's not visible on the page, they don't know to say that. So this is like sorry if this is too long of a tangent, but I've been doing ARIA labels for this kind of thing for years, and now I'm like stuck trying to figure out what kind of alternative solution we can have that serves both a screen reader audience and a speech recognition audience. But that's what this alert is about. To the best of your ability, make the link text as descriptive as possible for all kinds of users.
This is a good example of like sometimes you can't serve everybody well, which is why accessibility is a continuing practice versus something that you can just set once and be done with.
It is not achievable to be perfectly accessible. It requires constant improvement, constant testing. If you know people, or if you can afford to pay people, testing with real people who use assistive technology on a day-to-day basis is critical, especially people who are actually in whatever audience you're trying to serve, to know what their needs are and how you can adapt to those. A couple other things I want to point out about Wave is it's great at helping you quickly jump through things like, is all of my alternative text for all of my images decent? Because it highlights them all here in this feature section. You can kind of click through. These are just logos. We want them to say the name of the company. That's good. They don't say image of. They don't say logo for. That's good. But let's see. When we get to, screenshot-streamfield 2. This is one of the situations where the title of the image we haven't incorporated all of our best practices into wagtail.org yet. Mea culpa. When you upload an image to Wagtail, the default title, which is then used for the default alt text, is the file name of the image. So
Yeah, this is part of the reason why we're teaching this workshop is the earlier you build accessibility practices into a site, the more likely like when you inherit a site, you run into issues like we did with our site. Like it's harder to upgrade these things when you have a lot of existing content than just building some things in from the very beginning.
Yeah.
So. We are definitely going to fix this. It just takes more time and effort to fix something that has a lot of data in it already than a brand new project.
Yeah, for sure. And I do think it is legitimate that the default title of an image in Wagtail is its file name, because I've found in working with editors that that's often how they want to locate an image. If they've uploaded it, they have a reference to that file name somewhere. They can just put that into the search box in Wagtail and call it right up to insert it into their page. So that makes sense, but we don't want that to be alt text. Another good thing about Wave is it can help you visualize the structure of the page as created by the heading levels, like we talked about earlier. This is kind of a complex example because we have both, there's a hidden markup for the mobile navigation here. There's the markup for the regular navigation. And then we get into the meat of the page here. And it's also showing you the landmarks that we talked about earlier. So there's the header up here, the main content area. And we start to see the headings as we go down the page here. And actually all this is still in the navigation. We have multiple mains, which is perhaps an issue we should look into, but it's not causing errors that we know of. But again, test with real users of these technologies and see if that's the case or not. But we're not skipping any heading levels, so that's good. Back in the details, the other thing that I really wanted to highlight in Wave is this whole section on ARIA. We didn't say this earlier, I don't think. ARIA stands for Accessible Rich forget. It's a whole suite of things to help make your websites and rich applications more accessible. That's all of the properties that are prefixed with ARIA dash come from the ARIA specification. And it helps you locate all of the places that these are used because it's very easy also to misuse them. So having a quick way to look at where all they are being used and make sure they're being used appropriately.
Accessible, rich internet applications.
Accessible, rich internet applications. Thank you. Okay, that's Wave.
Probably named by the same people who named progressive web apps.
Lots of weird names out there. Okay. Sally, if you're not familiar with the A11Y numeronym, that's the thing where you take the first letter and the last letter of a word and chop out all the letters in the middle and then put the number of the letters you chopped out in between the first and last letter. So A11Y stands for accessibility, and a lot of tools incorporate that into their name, such as, and they also kind of look like L's. So this is Sally. We'll also be talking about Totally and Pally. Sally is a bookmarklet, first and foremost, I think. I'm going to refresh this to get rid of Wave. I need to show my bookmarks toolbar again. Sally is a great bookmarklet. Requires no browser add-on installation or anything like that. You click it once you're on a page. Pops up something down here, which I think we already had the Wagtail user bar, but it looks very similar. And you open it up, and the first thing it shows you is the page outline of the headings, just like Wave did. But then it has an output for 1 error and 8 warnings. And you click this button to step through them. Well, also you have the highlights of things on the page, and you can look at what it's saying about them. It thinks that this link label for the Wagtail logo is good because it's indicating that it's linking to our homepage. This also has a should this be a heading ? Has something to a warning here. Make sure that all videos have closed captioning. This video doesn't have any spoken word in it, and it has captions meet Wagtail CMS. It's fine, so we don't need to do anything about it, but it wants you to look at that and verify as a human that it can't just be, do you have a closed caption file in here, because as Meagen said, they could be hard-coded into the video itself. I'm going to click through here. You can step through them here with this button and go one by one. Let's find the one error that it's complaining about. Did I miss it? Oh, you know what it is? That's right. I remember this from my previewing this earlier. Actually, you can see it in the code here. There's an issue with the label in the cookie banner, which I had already dismissed, and so because I have a cookie, it didn't show it to me again. One of the links in there does not have appropriate text. None of the other tools found that. Next tool is something I cannot demo, unfortunately, but want to make sure you're aware of. Honestly, I just learned about this a day or two ago, because it was recently added to the Wagtail Nest collection of pseudo-officially supported Wagtail packages. Wagtail accessibility is it's a way to provide an interface. You can see here. Oh, that's a demo, not the video image. You can see here. It provides an interface, sort of like we just saw with Sally. This is using the Totally library, which was originally created by Khan Academy. And all you have to do is you install the package, you load its tag, and you drop its tag into your base template, and then whenever you are previewing a page, this only runs when you're previewing a page in Wagtail, it will offer you the opportunity to run the accessibility checker. Pretty cool. The one word of caution about this is that the underpinning totally library has been deprecated. They've stopped developing it, so this may not be useful that much longer. That's all the ways you can do a bunch of in-browser testing, which is one of the best ways to do it because you can see, most of them, they point to things on your site and say, this is exactly where this is happening. But there are other things you can use too. A couple things I want to mention are Pally. Pally is a set of 4 different tools, really, mostly focused on automated checks. They run on the command line. You can set up they have a dashboard that you can do to track ongoing results of your automated testing, a web service to run that, and a CI, continuous integration tool to run it, like against a pull request for your collaboration. Good stuff. And then Storybook. Storybook, if you're not familiar, is a front-end pattern library software tool that helps you build out your front end in isolated components. And it has a new accessibility test module that lets you test each component individually. It's not ideal to test, well, it is a good baseline to test components individually. It is not adequate because you also need to test them in combination with each other, but it's a great thing. If you're already using Storybook to build out a pattern library, strongly recommend you turn on the accessibility test. I think it's new as of Storybook 8. That's automated testing, but again, you have to do manual testing. Automated tests cannot catch everything. For one thing, you can't automate testing a screen reader. What is a screen reader going to read, and does it make sense to a human? Can't automate that. I've linked to some usage data also from the excellent WebAIM group. They do a survey every year of what the most popular screen readers are. If you're developing on Mac OS, probably the simplest thing to do is run the OS native voiceover. Use Safari because it is really geared to work best with Safari as compared to other browsers on Mac. If you have access to Windows, recommend that you run the NVDA. I don't know if it's an extension or just a third-party tool, but run that. Use with Chrome. Chrome tends to be the browser that most people use in connection with screen readers per that data. Or if you can pay for it or get it paid for, use JAWS. JAWS is slightly more popular for Windows users still, but it is expensive. Sorry, I skipped over keyboard navigation. Again, this is super easy for anyone to do. Open your website, start tabbing, and when you get to interactive things, use Enter, or I think usually Enter, maybe sometimes Spacebar, to make sure that you can interact with things as expected, like open a menu, close the menu, make sure you can keep going even if you've interacted with the menu. You don't have to reload and start over. It should be easy to find errors that way. And then speech input, as we talked about a little bit earlier, there are OS native options for attempting to use that, or Dragon, again, if you can pay for it. I admit this is not an area I have a huge amount of experience in. I'm still becoming more aware of issues with this mode of input. So I've linked an article that I found to be really helpful in learning about it. Finally, last major topic, I want to talk about doing an accessibility audit. If you're coming away from this talk and super jazzed about accessibility and you already have a website of some kind, I would recommend you do an audit. And if you're just starting something new, try to build accessibility from the beginning, but then especially if you're working with Wagtail, you have a bunch of editors doing things, you should do these periodically, quarterly, yearly at least. And it has to be manual because you have to collate data from automated tests and manual testing all together. Here's what I have sort of found is a decent workflow. You set up a spreadsheet, or maybe a GitHub project, or some other tool where you can track your findings. Start with your most important and popular pages. Run them through each automated tool for as much time as you can stomach and different tools as you can stomach. Run them through each automated tool. Verify which findings are legitimate. Record them in your spreadsheet or project or whatever, however you're tracking it. And I think there are two key metrics when you record them. You should give them an indication of severity and your best guess at an estimated level of effort it would take to fix that. And these are human subjective judgments. Severity, I think I would take into account a couple factors, like how much traffic does the page that this error is on get, if it's limited to a single page. If it's global across like if it's an issue with your global navigation, that's automatically more severe than something that only happens on one page, probably. And then does it hinder the ability of someone using assistive technology to accomplish their goal, or does it completely prevent them from doing that? So there's a range in between, like something that is just slightly under the required color contrast ratio is not as severe as somebody who's only using a keyboard can't tab past your global navigation. That's really severe. And then estimated effort to fix, if you don't know, try to get somebody who does to estimate that. Do the same thing for all your manual testing processes in addition to the automated ones. Mainly the three technologies we just talked about. And then try to prioritize your fixes based on impact and effort. The most severe issues that take the least amount of effort to fix, try to tackle those first. And then, kind of work your way toward the very low severity and high effort fixes. This is an example of I used GitHub projects to track this for my last major project. And so the title is just my one-line description of the issue. And in most cases, I click in the comments a much more detailed explanation of the issue, where it's occurring, a specific URL, or the global header, how I discovered it. I wanted to track this because I was thinking about this, all the different tools, and are all of these really going to show me unique things? And really, they did. I got interesting high or critical reports out of 1, 2, 3, 4 different tools, I think. So it shows the value of trying a bunch of different things. My severity ratings, my level of effort, current status as I then started to remediate them, if they were assigned to me or somebody else, and there's some other things here that you can imagine. Oh, and then ones that didn't get to complete, by the time we rolled off the project, I converted into full-blown issues for the team that was inheriting it. If you would like some other guided assistance on how to maybe perform one of these accessibility audits, my former employer, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, has publicly released an awesome manual accessibility audit tool that I helped develop the first version of, along with my friend Chris here. And it is basically a big multi-tab Excel spreadsheet that, it's got instructions in the first tab and then has ways to go through and categorize things in kind of the way I just described. It's super cool, and you can get the link when you download the slides later. Okay, have some links for further reading on accessibility. There's a specific page in the Wagtail docs on accessibility considerations. That's a great start if you're looking for Wagtail-specific guidance. We already talked about WebAIM. They have a great list of, again, survey data, blogs, and other guidance. There's some other useful websites that provide tons of amazing content, like the A11Y project, the Paciello group. I think they just go by PGI now. They have a great blog. There's a site called Inclusive Components that provides some straight to the point, recommended markup, and I think JavaScript in some cases for some of the more common interactive things that can be very hairy to try and do in an accessible way. And another former colleague of Chris and mine, David A. Kennedy, writes the Accessibility Weekly newsletter, which is a great weekly roundup of the latest news and tips from the accessibility community. Megan's list of Wagtail resources to wrap us up.
Yep, basically just have some additional resources on Wagtail if you need them. We have a demo project called the Bakery Demo that you can play around with if you want to see a more fully fledged demo. Also, please check out our extended tutorial. We go through everything from beginning to deployment. So if you've never deployed a Wagtail website before, that's a good resource as well. Any questions, thoughts, things people want to share before we break? Right there.
Yeah, you were talking about tracking any kind of accessibility issues with a spreadsheet or with issues. Is there any effort underway to maybe programmatically generate a report? Like, if, for instance, you put something through Veracode for static code analysis, and it spits out a report of everything that's wrong with your code. Is there going to be something like that in the future for accessibility?
So the question is about whether there's a more programmatic way than using a spreadsheet to track things and figure. I can tell you for sure that if somebody's claiming that AI can fix your problems, that's not definitely not the case. I'm not aware of anything. Are you?
Just for tracking over time, I'll refer back to the Pally project. The Pally project is one way to do this. If you combine their suite of tools in a cron job that runs their main interface nightly, you can pipe that data through a web service. You can display a dashboard. Is there a demo of the dashboard? Yeah. So this is what the dashboard kind of looks like. If you can track it across multiple sites, and it shows you when it's last run, and it keeps track of data over time. So this is one example of a way you could do that. If you're asking specifically about Wagtail and like its accessibility checker and how we can track issues with that over time, yes, there is a sponsorship opportunity. Do you remember that?
That is true. We do have a sponsorship opportunity.
Let me see if I can pull up that blog.
Basically, we need to find somebody to pay for it, but we do have an idea in the back.
Or a very generous open source contributor who's willing to do it on their free time.
Yes.
Because I'm thinking something like this could be good for like a build pipeline. Like you have to have like 80% coverage on tests, and you have to have X percentage of accessibility before you can deploy.
Yeah, many of these tools. To repeat, the gentleman was referring to including these kinds of checks in a build pipeline to make sure that you have no critical errors or something before you're allowed to deploy your latest code. That is definitely possible with many of these tools. Many of them come back to the Axe engine on the foundation, and there was also totally as another kind of back-end option, but they all have command line interfaces that you can wire up into whatever kind of scripting interface or CI service that you want to use that. And yeah, block your deployments if you want.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, we got a question back there.
It is not part of our presentation repository. It is on github.com/wagtail.
Yeah, we'll make sure to add the slides to the repo afterwards so that you'll definitely
Yes.
have all our links and stuff. It's one of those things where, again, I didn't want to undercut the conference. But yeah, you can find, we have the Wagtail organization has a lot of our stuff in it. This repo will probably ultimately move from my personal repo into that one eventually. So.
Yeah.
All right, any other questions? Okay, folks. Well, with great power comes great responsibility. Please take what you've learned today, go forth, do good, advocate for these things, because we really want more people on the internet who have screen readers to enjoy all the cat memes that we do. So,
And we'll stick around if you have questions after.
yes, definitely. Thank you so much for being here today.